What if your biggest bad luck isn't luck at all? What if it's a pattern your nervous system keeps selecting as reality? Think about it. The same money stress, the same relationship dynamics, the same bursts of motivation followed by the same collapse into procrastination. Different faces, different places, different months on the calendar, but the same emotional movie plays again. Here is the uncomfortable question most people avoid. If your life keeps repeating, who is pressing play? Because repetition is never random. Repetition is evidence of a program. In physics, we learn that observation is not passive. What you measure depends on how you measure it. Your reality is not just an external stage you walk across. It is also a feedback system responding to what you consistently signal. And the strongest signals rarely come from your words. They come from your dominant state. So let me ask you something that may feel confronting. Are you trying to create a new life while your internal identity is still broadcasting the old one? If your subconscious expects struggle, it will interpret peace as unsafe. If your emotional memory expects disappointment, it will treat opportunity like a trap. You might consciously want freedom, but unconsciously you may be loyal to familiar tension because the brain doesn't prioritize happiness. It prioritizes predictability. This is why positive thinking fails for so many people. They speak hope while their body speaks fear. They write goals while their nervous system keeps scanning for danger. And the world seems to mirror that contradiction. Now, I want you to hold an open loop in your mind, because we will come back to it. If your life is a mirror, what exactly is it reflecting? Your desires or your conditioning? Most people assume reality responds to what they want. But in every serious model of co-creation, reality responds to what you are, your baseline frequency, your default emotional posture, your unconscious expectation. Here is the shift that changes everything. You do not manifest what you think about occasionally. You reinforce what you return to emotionally. And whatever you repeatedly return to becomes your normal. Your normal becomes your decisions. Your decisions become your outcomes. So the real question is not, how do I attract what I want? The real question is, what internal program keeps attracting what I keep getting, despite my intentions? The hidden program running your life. Have you ever wondered why you promise yourself change, only to find yourself making the same decisions weeks later? Why does clarity in the morning dissolve into self-sabotage by night? If you truly have free will, why does your behavior often feel automatic? Here is a truth most people are never taught. Your brain operates like a programmed system, not a spontaneous creator. It is not randomly generating your life. It is executing stored instructions. And most of those instructions were written long before you became consciously aware of them. More than 90% of your daily decisions are unconscious. That means your rational mind, the voice you call me, is often just a narrator. It explains choices that were already made emotionally milliseconds before you became aware of them. You think you chose that reaction. In reality, your nervous system reacted first, and your mind justified it after. So let me ask you something important. If your emotional brain is making the decisions, what emotional memories is it consulting? Deep within the brain, the amygdala functions as an emotional command center. It does not store facts. It stores imprints. It remembers how something felt: fear, shame, rejection, scarcity. And when a similar situation appears, even decades later, it activates the same physiological response. Tight chest, hesitation, sudden doubt, defensive tone, avoidance. Your body reacts before your logic even forms a sentence. Now consider this. If you grew up absorbing tension around money, criticism around success, instability in relationships, those emotional signatures become your baseline. The brain does not ask whether those conditions are still real. It asks only one question: is this familiar? If the answer is yes, it feels safe, even if it hurts. This is why procrastination is rarely laziness. It is protection. This is why financial self-sabotage is not stupidity. It is emotional conditioning. The brain prefers predictable discomfort over unpredictable expansion. And here is the open loop we must confront. If your nervous system is programmed for survival, not fulfillment, how do you rewrite the code? Because until the emotional imprint changes, your external circumstances will keep reorganizing around the same internal signal. You cannot override a subconscious pattern with logic alone. The system must be reconditioned at the level where it was first installed, emotion. Now the real question becomes, are you ready to stop negotiating with the symptoms and start reprogramming the source? If this is already shifting your perspective, subscribe now. Like this video if you're ready to stop repeating the same patterns. Because what comes next will change how you see yourself. The emotional brain is the real architect. What if the part of you trying to figure everything out is not actually in control? What if the true architect of your life operates beneath thought, beneath logic, beneath conscious intention? Most people assume that change begins with analysis. They read, study, take notes, gather insight. But here is the uncomfortable reality. Intellectual understanding does not dissolve emotional programming. You can know exactly why you react the way you do and still repeat the reaction.
Why?
Because the emotional brain decides first. The amygdala and related limbic structures do not evaluate life through reason. They evaluate through stored emotional references. When something resembles a past imprint, tone of voice, financial pressure, romantic uncertainty, the body activates instantly. Stress hormones surge, muscles tighten, breath shortens, attention narrows. And all of this happens before you consciously interpret the situation. Your rational mind then steps in, not as the decision maker, but as the spokesperson. It builds a story that justifies the reaction. This won't work. I need more time. It's not the right moment. But beneath those sentences lies a deeper signal. This feels unsafe. Here is the crucial distinction. The emotional brain does not differentiate between past and present. It recognizes patterns, not timelines. If success once triggered criticism, expansion may still feel threatening. If vulnerability once resulted in rejection, intimacy may still activate caution. If financial instability once created chaos, abundance may paradoxically feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar often feels dangerous. So let me ask you, are your current limitations actually logical conclusions or emotional echoes? Most self-sabotage is not conscious rebellion. It is unconscious loyalty to old emotional states. The system is trying to maintain equilibrium. It prefers a known identity over an unknown one, even if that known identity includes struggle. This is why real transformation requires more than mindset adjustments. It requires emotional recalibration. A new emotional experience must be introduced and repeated until it becomes the new baseline. Because here is the law that governs this process. Your external reality stabilizes around your internal identity. Not your goals, not your wishes, your identity. And identity is not formed by what you think occasionally. It is formed by what you feel consistently. So the question is no longer, how do I change my life? The question becomes, which emotional identity have I been rehearsing, and am I ready to rehearse a new one? The brain chooses familiar pain over unknown freedom. Why would anyone sabotage their own progress? Why would someone pray for opportunity and then hesitate the moment it appears? Why does expansion often feel more uncomfortable than struggle? The answer is not weakness. It is wiring. Your brain is not designed to make you fulfilled. It is designed to keep you alive. And from a neurological perspective, survival means one thing above all else: predictability. The brain consumes enormous amounts of energy. Creating new patterns requires metabolic effort. Uncertainty requires attention. Risk requires recalibration. So, whenever possible, the system chooses what it already knows, even if what it knows is painful. Familiar stress feels safer than unfamiliar peace. This is why someone can leave one dysfunctional relationship only to recreate the same emotional dynamic with a different person. This is why financial instability can persist even after income increases. The external conditions shift, but the internal template remains the same. Let me ask you something deeper. If freedom feels unfamiliar, could your nervous system interpret it as danger? When you move toward a new level, greater income, visibility, intimacy, responsibility, the brain scans for historical references. If it finds none, it flags the situation as uncertain. And uncertainty activates stress responses. You may label it doubt. You may call it intuition. But often, it is simply unfamiliarity. Here is the paradox. Your mind says, I want more. Your nervous system says, stay where it is predictable. And in that invisible conflict, behavior slows down. Procrastination appears. Opportunities are postponed. Conversations are avoided. This is not coincidence. It is a self-reinforcing loop. Fear leads to avoidance. Avoidance prevents new evidence. Lack of new evidence confirms the old belief. The neural circuit strengthens. The identity solidifies. And so, the cycle continues. Now consider the law of attraction from a deeper perspective. It is not merely about thinking positively. It is about coherence. If your conscious desire conflicts with your subconscious expectation, the stronger signal wins. And the stronger signal is always the one tied to emotion. So here is the question you must confront. Are you truly afraid of failure? Or are you more afraid of becoming someone you have never been before? Because stepping into a new identity requires tolerating temporary instability. It requires teaching the nervous system that expansion is not a threat. And that is where real reprogramming begins. The invisible prison of neural loops. Have you ever noticed how one small fear can quietly shape an entire week? One hesitation leads to a delay. The delay creates guilt. The guilt reinforces doubt. And suddenly, what began as a moment becomes a pattern. But what if this is not random? What if it is a closed neural circuit reinforcing itself? Here is how the loop works. A trigger appears. It may be an email, a financial responsibility, a conversation you have been postponing. The emotional brain scans it for familiarity. If it resembles an old imprint, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of loss, it activates tension. That tension creates discomfort. The brain then searches for relief. The fastest way to reduce discomfort is avoidance. You scroll. You postpone. You rationalize. You promise to do it later. For a moment, relief arrives. And that relief is the reinforcement. Your nervous system learns. Avoidance reduces stress. It confirms the strategy. The next time a similar trigger appears, the loop activates faster. Fear, avoidance, relief, confirmation. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathway. The circuit becomes efficient, automatic, invisible. Now let me ask you something critical. How many of your current limitations are not external obstacles, but well-practiced loops? From a quantum perspective, repetition stabilizes probability. What you repeatedly energize becomes statistically dominant in your experience. Emotion fuels attention. Attention reinforces expectation. Expectation filters perception. And perception guides action. The loop is both neurological and vibrational. This is why change feels difficult. You are not simply trying something new. You are interrupting a circuit that has been optimized for years. The brain prefers efficiency over expansion, and repetition is efficient. But here is the breakthrough insight. A loop only continues while it remains unconscious. The moment you become aware of the sequence, trigger, emotion, reaction, you create a gap. And inside that gap lies power. Because a loop cannot complete itself if you refuse to execute the final step. So the real question is this. When the next trigger appears, will you complete the familiar cycle, or will you pause long enough to rewrite it? That pause is not small. It is revolutionary. And in that pause, the architecture of your future begins to shift. Neuroplasticity, the biological proof that you can change. What if the story you have been telling yourself about being this way is scientifically outdated? What if your personality, your habits, even your emotional tendencies are not fixed traits, but adaptable circuits? For decades, science believed the brain was largely rigid after early adulthood. But modern neuroscience has demonstrated something extraordinary. The brain is plastic. It rewires itself continuously in response to experience, attention, and repetition. This means your patterns are not permanent. They are practiced. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to form new neural connections and reorganize existing ones. Every thought you repeat strengthens a pathway. Every emotional reaction you rehearse deepens a circuit. Every avoided action reinforces a route of escape. But here is the empowering part. The same mechanism that built your limitations can build your liberation. Let me ask you something transformative. If repetition created the current version of you, what could intentional repetition create next? Your brain does not distinguish between real and vividly imagined experiences in the way you might think. Emotional intensity and focused attention are what signal importance. When you consistently visualize a new outcome while generating genuine emotional engagement, the brain begins to encode that state as familiar. Familiarity reduces resistance. This is why high-level performers rehearse mentally. This is why emotional exposure therapy works. This is why identity-based transformation outperforms surface-level motivation. But here is the nuance most people miss. Intellectual agreement does not rewire the brain. Emotional experience does. You cannot think your way into a new life. You must feel your way into it. When you repeatedly experience courage in moments of fear, the brain updates its reference file. When you remain present during discomfort instead of escaping, the nervous system recalibrates its threshold. When you act in alignment with a new identity, even before you fully believe it, you begin carving a new neural road. And roads, once reinforced, become the new default. So the question shifts from, can I change, to something more precise. Am I willing to endure the temporary discomfort required to stabilize a new internal pattern? Because neuroplasticity guarantees possibility, but consistency determines outcome. The brain will adapt. The only variable left is whether you guide the adaptation or let old loops continue guiding it for you. Understanding is not enough. Have you ever had a powerful realization about your past, only to find yourself reacting the same way days later? Have you ever said, "Now I understand why I do this," and yet nothing truly changed? Why does awareness feel empowering in the moment, but powerless in practice? Because insight is cognitive. Transformation is emotional. Your rational mind can analyze trauma, decode childhood patterns, and map behavioral tendencies. It can build elegant explanations. But the nervous system does not respond to explanation. It responds to experience. Let me ask you something direct. If knowing were enough, wouldn't you already be free? Most people are not trapped because they lack information. They are trapped because the emotional imprint remains intact. The body still reacts the same way. The heart rate still accelerates. The tension still appears. The avoidance still feels urgent. That is because emotional memory is stored somatically, not linguistically. The brain records sensations and states, not paragraphs. You may intellectually understand that you are safe, but if your body still feels threatened, the old program runs. This is where many seekers get stuck. They collect knowledge. They consume content. They become fluent in psychological vocabulary. But the emotional circuitry remains untouched. And until it is overwritten, repetition continues. So, what actually creates change? A new emotional imprint. When you encounter a familiar trigger and consciously remain present instead of reacting automatically, you introduce new data into the system. When you choose courage while your body expects avoidance, you send a powerful neurological signal. This situation is no longer dangerous. That lived contradiction begins to dissolve the old association. Think of it this way. Your brain learns through contrast. If fear is followed by escape, the loop strengthens. If fear is followed by grounded presence, the brain must update its prediction. And prediction is everything. From a co-creation perspective, this is where identity shifts begin. You are no longer reinforcing the story of "I always react this way." You are embodying a new narrative through action. So here is the deeper question. Are you willing to move beyond understanding and step into emotional rehearsal? Because awareness opens the door, but repetition, lived in real time, rewrites the script. The reset window, where destiny can shift in seconds. What if the most powerful moment to change your life lasts only a few seconds, and you usually miss it? What if transformation does not require a perfect environment, but precise timing? There is a critical window that opens every time you are emotionally triggered, and most people waste it. When fear rises, when irritation spikes, when doubt tightens your chest, Your nervous system has activated an old circuit. The emotional brain is preparing to execute the familiar pattern. This is the exact moment most people become reactive. But here is the breakthrough. The moment of activation is also the moment of plasticity. When a neural pathway fires, it becomes temporarily malleable. In neuroscience, this is known as reconsolidation. When a memory or emotional imprint is reactivated, it can be modified before being stored again. Let me ask you something powerful. What if every trigger is not an attack, but an opportunity? Instead of reacting automatically, you pause. You stop speaking. You inhale deeply. You count slowly. You observe the sensation without labeling it as good or bad. This simple interruption does something extraordinary. It prevents the old loop from completing itself. And when a loop is interrupted, the brain must reorganize. At first, the discomfort may intensify. The body expects the usual reaction. It anticipates escape, defensiveness, withdrawal. But when you remain present, grounded, steady, aware, you introduce a new outcome into the circuit. The system updates. Over time, repetition of this pause creates a new association. Trigger no longer equals collapse. Trigger becomes a signal for awareness. The identity begins to shift from reactive to deliberate. Now consider this from a co-creation perspective. If your reality mirrors your dominant emotional pattern, then every successful reset alters the signal you broadcast. You are no longer reinforcing fear. You are stabilizing regulation. And regulation changes perception. You begin to see opportunities where you once saw threats. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of default. So here is the essential question. The next time discomfort appears, will you treat it as confirmation of limitation or as the doorway to reprogramming? Because destiny does not change through force. It changes in the quiet seconds where you refuse to repeat what you used to be. Resistance is the sign you are rewriting yourself. Why does growth feel uncomfortable? Why does expansion sometimes come with anxiety, doubt, or even exhaustion? And why, the moment you decide to change, does life seem to push back? Most people interpret resistance as a sign to stop. But what if resistance is not opposition? What if it is evidence that something inside you is restructuring? Your brain is an energy-efficient system. It favors established pathways because they require less effort. When you begin thinking differently, acting differently, responding differently, you are demanding new neural construction. And construction consumes energy. Discomfort is not always danger. Often, it is recalibration. Let me ask you something important. When you feel internal friction, do you assume something is wrong, or do you recognize that something is shifting? Every time you interrupt an old loop, the brain experiences uncertainty. And uncertainty activates alertness. This alertness can feel like anxiety. It can feel like instability. It can even feel like self-doubt whispering, "This isn't you." But of course it isn't you, at least not the old version. This is the threshold where most people retreat. They interpret temporary instability as failure. They return to familiar habits to regain emotional equilibrium. And in doing so, they unknowingly reinforce the old identity. Here is the deeper principle. Identity resists displacement. When you choose to act beyond your conditioning, the internal system questions it. Not because you are incapable, but because you are becoming unfamiliar to yourself. From a vibrational perspective, this is also the moment your signal changes. As your internal frequency shifts, your external environment may respond with temporary contrast. Old dynamics surface. Old relationships strain. Old fears reappear. This is not regression. It is exposure. The system is revealing what must be integrated before stabilization occurs. Think of resistance as the muscle soreness of psychological evolution. When you exercise physically, the tension indicates adaptation. When you stretch mentally and emotionally, the tension indicates expansion. So here is the crucial question. Will you interpret resistance as proof that you cannot change, or as confirmation that you are changing? Because transformation is not the absence of discomfort. It is the willingness to remain aligned while discomfort dissolves the old architecture. And the moment you stop fearing resistance, you stop being controlled by it. From victim to creator, the identity shift that changes everything. What if the most dangerous belief you carry is not about money, love, or success, but about who you think you are? What if the real limitation is not your circumstances, but your identification with them? Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Do you see yourself as someone life happens to, or as someone who shapes what happens? Most people do not consciously choose the role of victim. It develops subtly. After enough disappointments, enough repeated failures, enough emotional wounds, a narrative forms. This is just how my life is. Nothing ever works out. I always struggle. And here's the problem. The brain does not distinguish between observation and identity. When a repeated experience becomes internalized, it turns into a self-concept. And self-concept governs behavior. If you believe you are unlucky, you hesitate before taking bold action. If you believe relationships always fail, you unconsciously test partners for confirmation. If you believe money is hard to keep, you relax discipline the moment you feel temporary relief. Identity directs perception. Perception directs decision. Decision directs outcome. From a co-creation standpoint, this is the fundamental law. Reality organizes around your dominant self-image, not your temporary motivation, not your hopeful affirmations, your identity. So the shift from victim to creator is not about denial. It is about ownership. Ownership does not mean blaming yourself for every past outcome. It means recognizing that the past was shaped by unconscious programming, and that programming can be rewritten. When you say, "This is happening because I am conditioned this way," you feel powerless. When you say, "This is happening because I have been rehearsing this identity," something changes. Rehearsed identities can be replaced. But here is the crucial moment. You must separate who you are from what you experienced. You are not your conditioning. You are the awareness capable of reconditioning it. The creator identity begins with one radical assumption. If my internal state influences my external results, then I have influence. Influence restores responsibility. Responsibility restores agency. Agency restores momentum. And once you begin acting from the identity of someone who can shape outcomes, even before full evidence appears, you alter the signal you send into the field of possibility. So the real question is this: who have you been rehearsing, and who are you ready to become? The 4 pillars that shape your personal frequency. If reality mirrors your internal state, what exactly is it reflecting? What are the components of the signal you continuously transmit into your environment? Most people think manifestation is about desire. But desire is only surface-level energy. Beneath desire lies structure. And that structure is built on 4 fundamental pillars: beliefs, emotions, communication, and actions. Let me ask you something essential. Are these 4 pillars aligned in your life, or are they contradicting each other? Start with beliefs. Beliefs are not just opinions. They're subconscious assumptions about what is possible, what is safe, and what is deserved. If you consciously want abundance, but subconsciously believe wealth creates instability, your system broadcasts mixed instructions. Then come emotions. Emotions are the energetic charge behind beliefs. They amplify them. A belief without emotion is weak. A belief fused with emotion becomes a directive. Fear intensifies limitation. Gratitude stabilizes expansion. Shame compresses identity. Confidence expands it. Next is communication. And this is deeper than words. Only a small percentage of communication is verbal. Tone, posture, eye contact, rhythm of speech, these nonverbal signals reveal your internal state. If your words declare certainty, but your body expresses doubt, the stronger signal prevails. Finally, actions. Actions are the materialization of the previous 3 pillars. They are belief in motion. They are emotion embodied. They confirm identity. Now consider this. If one pillar collapses, the entire structure destabilizes. You cannot sustain a high-frequency emotional state while constantly speaking negatively. You cannot maintain empowering beliefs while repeatedly acting in avoidance. You cannot expect coherent outcomes from incoherent internal architecture. From a quantum perspective, coherence determines amplification. When thought, feeling, speech, and behavior align, the signal strengthens, and a strong signal organizes probability more efficiently. This is why some people appear magnetic. It is not luck. It is alignment. Their beliefs support their actions. Their emotions reinforce their words. Their communication reflects their identity. So the deeper question becomes, which pillar in your life requires reinforcement? Because transformation is not random inspiration. It is structural realignment. And when the 4 pillars stand in coherence, your frequency stops fluctuating and starts stabilizing into something reality can no longer ignore. Coherence, when thought, emotion, and action speak the same language. Why do some people seem to accelerate effortlessly while others push, strain, and still remain stuck? Why does force often fail where alignment succeeds? The answer lies in one principle: coherence. Let me ask you something precise. Are your thoughts, emotions, words, and actions telling the same story, or are they contradicting one another? In physics, coherent waves amplify each other. When frequencies align, their power increases. When they are misaligned, they cancel each other out. The same principle applies internally. When you think one thing, feel another, say something else, and act from hesitation, your signal weakens. Many people declare confidence while internally rehearsing doubt. They speak abundance while emotionally anticipating loss. They visualize success, but take minimal action. The system becomes fragmented. Fragmentation diffuses energy. From a neurological perspective, incoherence creates friction. Your nervous system detects contradiction. It cannot stabilize a clear prediction about who you are or where you are going. And without prediction, The brain defaults to old patterns. From a co-creation standpoint, incoherence dilutes manifestation. The field responds most strongly to consistent signals. If your internal architecture is unstable, your external results will mirror that instability. Now consider the opposite. When you cultivate a belief and emotionally reinforce it through repetition, your body begins to normalize it. When you speak from that belief consistently, your communication becomes grounded. When you act in alignment with it, even in small ways, you create behavioral evidence. Belief becomes embodied. Embodiment stabilizes identity. Identity shapes expectation. Expectation filters perception. And perception guides opportunity recognition. This is why alignment feels powerful. It reduces internal noise. It removes contradiction. It eliminates mixed instructions. So, here is the essential question. What would change if every pillar of your internal structure moved in the same direction? Not temporarily. Not only when you feel inspired, but consistently. Coherence does not require perfection. It requires integrity between layers. When your thoughts support your emotions support your words, and your words support your actions, you generate a unified signal. And unified signals reorganize reality far more efficiently than scattered effort ever could. Alignment is not mystical. It is structural precision. Emotional rehearsal, training the nervous system for a new reality. If your nervous system is wired for familiarity, how do you make a new identity feel familiar before external evidence appears? How do you convince your body that expansion is safe? This is where emotional rehearsal becomes essential. Let me ask you something subtle but powerful. When you imagine your desired future, do you merely see it, or do you feel it? Visualization without emotion is weak. It is conceptual. But when imagination is fused with genuine emotional engagement, the brain responds as if the experience is real. Neural circuits activate. Hormonal responses shift. The body begins to encode the state as known. And familiarity reduces resistance. Elite athletes use this method deliberately. They mentally rehearse success repeatedly until performance feels natural. The brain does not wait for physical proof to begin adaptation. It adapts to repeated emotional input. From a co-creation perspective, this is critical. The law of attraction is not activated by passive wishing. It is activated by stabilized emotional frequency. And frequency is trained. But here's the nuance most people overlook. Emotional rehearsal must be consistent enough to override old patterns. If you spend 5 minutes visualizing confidence and the rest of the day rehearsing anxiety, which signal dominates? The brain calculates repetition, not intention. So the practice becomes disciplined. You close your eyes. You breathe deeply. You generate the feeling of certainty, gratitude, strength, or stability as if the desired outcome were already integrated into your identity. You hold that state. You allow your body to relax inside it. At first, it may feel artificial. That is normal. You are introducing unfamiliar data, but repetition builds credibility. Let me ask you something transformative. What if the goal is not to attract a new reality, but to normalize it internally until it feels inevitable? When inevitability replaces hope, behavior changes automatically. You take bolder steps. You tolerate discomfort longer. You communicate with greater authority. You stop negotiating with fear. because your nervous system is no longer trying to protect the old identity. It has begun rehearsing the new one. And once the internal rehearsal becomes stable, the external world begins to reorganize around it, not through magic, but through alignment, perception, and decisive action that matches who you now believe yourself to be. Emotional rehearsal, installing the identity before the evidence. What if you have been waiting for evidence before allowing yourself to feel different? What if you have been saying, once it happens, then I'll feel confident, secure, abundant? Let me challenge that sequence. What if the feeling must come first? Your brain does not wait for external proof to generate internal states. It generates internal states based on expectation. And expectation is shaped by repetition. If you repeatedly rehearse anxiety about the future, your body practices that future. If you repeatedly rehearse inadequacy, your nervous system prepares for limitation. So let me ask you something critical. What emotional future have you been practicing without realizing it? Emotional rehearsal is not fantasy. It is neurological preparation. When you vividly imagine an outcome and allow yourself to feel the corresponding state, calm, confidence, certainty, you activate similar neural circuits as if the event were unfolding in real time. The key is not visualization alone. It is emotional embodiment. Your body must experience the state as familiar before reality reflects it as stable. Because from a survival perspective, the brain resists what feels foreign. But when you repeatedly expose your nervous system to a new emotional baseline, you reduce resistance. Familiarity replaces fear. This is how athletes prepare for high-pressure performance. This is how leaders build resilience. They do not wait for chaos to train regulation. They rehearse it beforehand. Now consider manifestation through this lens. If your identity remains emotionally aligned with your old reality, new outcomes will feel unstable. You may receive opportunity, but subconsciously destabilize it. You may attract progress but struggle to sustain it. Why? Because identity precedes evidence. You cannot consistently hold what does not feel like you. So the real question is not, when will it happen? The real question is, have I practiced becoming the version of myself who naturally sustains it? Emotional rehearsal builds internal proof before external proof appears. It trains your nervous system to treat expansion as normal. It reduces the shock of growth. And when growth no longer feels foreign, you stop sabotaging it. The identity is installed first. The evidence follows. Attention, the currency that shapes your reality. Where's your attention resting right now? And more importantly, where does it return when you are not consciously directing it? Attention is not neutral. It is creative. In quantum physics, observation influences outcome. At the psychological level, attention influences perception. And perception determines the version of reality you experience. So let me ask you directly, are you training your attention to detect possibility or to confirm limitation? Your brain is constantly filtering information. Out of millions of stimuli, it selects only what aligns with your dominant expectations. If you believe opportunities are rare, your attention will overlook them. If you believe people are untrustworthy, your focus will magnify every minor inconsistency. If you believe progress is slow, you will notice delays more than breakthroughs. Attention feeds belief. Belief guides attention. This feedback loop is subtle but powerful. From a neurological perspective, whatever you repeatedly focus on strengthens its corresponding neural circuits. From a vibrational perspective, whatever you consistently energize becomes statistically dominant in your lived experience. Here is the critical insight. You may not control every external event, but you always influence what you amplify internally. If your attention dwells on fear-based scenarios, your body rehearses stress. If your attention lingers on gratitude, your nervous system stabilizes. If your attention repeatedly returns to self-doubt, hesitation becomes automatic. Attention is rehearsal. Now consider this. Most people allow their environment to direct their attention. News, social media, conversations, past memories. They react instead of choose. And over time, this reactive focus builds an identity aligned with external noise. But conscious creators reverse the order. They select where attention rests. They deliberately amplify states that support expansion. They train their focus to notice growth, possibility, and alignment, even when circumstances are not yet ideal. This is not denial. It is strategic allocation of cognitive energy. Let me ask you something transformative. If attention is your most valuable resource, why give it to patterns you no longer want to reinforce? Where attention goes, neural pathways grow stronger. Where attention lingers, emotional energy accumulates. And what accumulates becomes your baseline frequency. So the discipline is simple but not easy. Redirect your attention with intention. Because the life you experience tomorrow is being shaped by what you repeatedly focus on today. The present moment, where reprogramming becomes real. When does change actually happen? Tomorrow? Next month? After one more book, one more breakthrough, one more perfect condition? Or does it happen in a single, quiet decision made right now? Let me ask you something essential. How often are you truly present when your patterns activate? Most people live either in memory or anticipation. They replay what happened. They predict what might happen. And while the mind travels, the body reacts automatically. Old conditioning runs without interruption. But the only place reprogramming can occur is in the present moment. The past is a memory stored in neural networks. The future is a projection built from those same networks. If you are not present when a trigger arises, the old pathway completes itself before awareness intervenes. Presence interrupts momentum. When fear surfaces and you remain attentive instead of reactive, you prevent the automatic script from finishing. When doubt whispers and you consciously choose aligned action anyway, you create contrast. And contrast is what forces the brain to update. Now consider this from a co-creation perspective. The present moment is the only point of influence. You cannot change yesterday's signal. You cannot directly act in tomorrow's circumstances. But you can alter the frequency you stabilize right now. And frequency stabilizes through repetition in real time. Let me ask you something deeper. If the present moment is the gateway to transformation, why postpone your power to some future version of yourself? The identity you are becoming is built through small, repeated decisions made under real conditions. Not in theory. Not in visualization alone. In lived experience. Presence allows you to observe your internal state without being possessed by it. It allows you to choose your response rather than default to conditioning. It allows you to embody coherence instead of contradiction. Each time you remain present during discomfort, you strengthen self-regulation. Each time you act in alignment despite internal noise, you reinforce a new identity. And identity solidified in the present moment reshapes probability. Transformation does not arrive dramatically. It accumulates quietly through consistent awareness practice now, before evidence appears, before certainty feels natural, before comfort replaces growth. So the question is not, when will my life change? The question is, what will you choose in this moment that your past self would not have chosen? Letting go, the paradox that unlocks manifestation. Why does obsession slow things down? Why does clinging to an outcome often push it further away? And why do breakthroughs sometimes occur the moment you finally relax? Let me ask you something honest. Are you trying to control the outcome because you do not yet trust your alignment? Control is often disguised as effort. You monitor. You analyze. You check for signs. You overthink every step. But beneath that hypervigilance is usually one emotion: fear of uncertainty. The brain prefers predictability. When you want something deeply, success, love, financial expansion, it interprets the desire as risk. And risk activates the need to manage every variable. But here's the paradox. Excessive control signals scarcity. From a vibrational perspective, attachment reinforces the emotional state of, I do not have this yet. It keeps your focus anchored in absence. Your nervous system remains tense. Your thoughts circle around lack. Your actions become reactive rather than grounded. Let me ask you something transformative. What if letting go is not giving up, but stabilizing trust? Letting go does not mean abandoning your vision. It means releasing emotional desperation. It means acting in alignment while allowing space for timing, process, and reorganization. When you are internally coherent, when your beliefs, emotions, communication, and actions are aligned, you do not need to force outcomes. You move with clarity. You respond with confidence. You make decisions from stability rather than panic. And stability shifts perception. Opportunities that once felt invisible become noticeable. Conversations flow more naturally. Risks feel calculated instead of overwhelming. You stop trying to micromanage the universe and start collaborating with it. From a neurological standpoint, letting go reduces stress chemistry. Reduced stress enhances cognitive flexibility. Flexible thinking improves decision-making. Better decisions compound over time. From a co-creation standpoint, letting go strengthens your signal. It communicates certainty rather than doubt, and certainty amplifies coherence. So the real question is this: are you holding your vision with confidence or gripping it with fear? Because manifestation is not accelerated by tension. It is accelerated by alignment combined with release. When you trust your internal reprogramming, you no longer chase outcomes. You embody the identity that naturally attracts and sustains them. And in that embodiment, reality responds, not to your urgency, but to your stability. If this message shifted something inside you, do not let it fade into background noise. Subscribe to the channel and join a community committed to conscious evolution. Like this video if you are ready to stop repeating old patterns. Share it with someone who needs to remember that change is not luck, it is alignment. Your transformation begins the moment you decide to rehearse a new identity. Stay aligned.